Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. The book we are interpreting for you is the classic British literature work Sense and Sensibility. The author is one of the most significant novelists of the late 18th century in England, Jane Austen. Austen is one of the most important pioneering figures in the history of British novels. Although her writing revolves around everyday life, she skillfully uncovers drama and creates suspense in the mundane. The splendid and brilliant 19th century British literature owes much to her enlightenment. To understand Austen's importance, one only needs to look at the £10 note with her portrait, which put an end to the history of featuring only male figures except for the British Queen on British banknotes. We have previously interpreted another masterpiece of hers, Pride and Prejudice, both of which hold a significant place among the most important classical novels. These two works are often compared as they share many similarities, most notably in their titles. Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. These pairs not only convey contrasting meanings but also cleverly rhyme. Rhyming is a form of poetic device in English where the first letters of several words repeat, creating a special rhythm when read aloud. Besides the titles, these two novels, in both their embryonic and final forms, were born in the same period. Austen began writing at the age of 12 or 13, and around 1797, in her early 20s, she wrote two epistolary novels. Over a decade later, she revised them into full-length novels, narrated in the third person. Although Austen finished Pride and Prejudice first, Sense and Sensibility was published in 1811, 2 years earlier than Pride and Prejudice, making it Austen's first published full-length novel. Consequently, we can see that both novels share some similarities in their plot, writing style, and character settings, with their themes revolving around the marriage affairs of genteel young women in the English countryside. In Sense and Sensibility, Austen invested much effort in developing the depth of the characters. The original title of this novel was Eleanor and Marianne, the names of the two main characters, with Eleanor being rational and composed, understanding how to restrain her emotions, while Marianne single-mindedly pursues romantic and uncommon feelings. Throughout the book, the personalities of Eleanor and Marianne become increasingly distinct through contrast. Sense and Sensibility are not only important components of the plot but also reflect Austen's contemplation. Women in disadvantaged positions can only attain a complete personality through continuous self-improvement. Eleanor and Marianne are sometimes sisters and at other times close friends. In this work, Austen intertwines the growth histories of these two sisters and creates a classic story type in women's literature, which extends to works like the phenomenally popular Neapolitan novels. Additionally, Sense and Sensibility makes a positive contribution to the evolution of novel techniques, which we will discuss in detail later. When interpreting Pride and Prejudice, we reviewed the characteristics of Austen's era. These characteristics can also help us understand Sense and Sensibility, a novel written over 200 years ago. Now let's briefly review the characteristics of that era in light of the novel's content. In Sense and Sensibility, male characters often discuss the topic of enclosures, which is a distinct mark of the era. The historical account of the enclosure movement is that during the dissolution of the feudal system in the 14th and 15th centuries, the emerging bourgeoisie and new aristocracy in England violently seized the peasants' land rights and ownership, enclosing these lands to become private large pastures and farms. In Europe, the enclosure movement in England was the most typical and extensive. By the 18th century, the British government passed the Enclosure Acts, further legitimizing the privatization of land, and there was a boom in the establishment of farms and estates. Meanwhile, the business of opening new sea routes overseas was flourishing, and the woolen products from the thriving textile industry during the enclosure movement could be rapidly transported abroad. The 18th century was the time when Austen grew up. The Industrial Revolution had already begun, and the middle class was becoming a stable and influential force, both in cities and rural areas. In Austen's works, we see many clergymen, merchants, lawyers, and country gentry who lack titles but hold new money, exerting an increasingly significant impact on social and economic life. Accordingly, families as units of social and economic life, and the institution of marriage, were also undergoing transformations in ideas and trends. In Sense and Sensibility, we can also see that young ladies at the time often took pride in reading poetry. In Chapter 5, when Marianne is forced to leave her childhood home, she cannot help but express her emotions in imitation of the poetry of that time. This plot is highly compatible with the specific literary context of that era. In the 18th century, the prominent poets of the time, like Wordsworth, held the stage, and the genre of novel had not yet gained much literary prestige in England. Although there were already a vast number of novels, widely circulated and profitable for their authors, male writers and readers often felt ashamed to be associated with them. This gave rise to a unique phenomenon. Women were the ones reading and writing novels. Jane Austen is a representative figure among this group of women. She grew up in a respectable clergyman's family in the southern part of England, where everyone received a good education and had the opportunity to read extensively. It is said that Austen had a romantic relationship with an Irish lawyer, but the marriage did not materialize, leading to a lifelong delay in marriage. However, this delay eventually facilitated her writing career. Austen focused on unearthing drama in everyday life, and all 6 of her novels were published anonymously. Her literary reputation only came to fruition decades or even centuries later with retrospective recognition. Regarding Austen's novel concept, we might find an answer in her other work, Northanger Abbey. Through the plot where the female protagonist is reading a novel, Austen stands on the author's standpoint, defending the dignity of novels. The original text states, "A novel is a work that displays the tremendous power of thought, conveys the most thorough understanding of human nature in the most appropriate characterization of its various manifestations, and conveys a work teeming with the liveliest wit and humor, all in the most appropriate language." Now that we have explored the characteristics of the era and Austen's novel concept, let's delve into this novel. The events in Sense and Sensibility have a resemblance to Pride and Prejudice, both closely tied to England's complex inheritance system. The story unfolds in Sussex, England, and it all begins with the passing of Mr. Dashwood of the Dashwood family. The Dashwood estate is substantial, and according to the entailed inheritance rules, Mr. Dashwood leaves the property to his nephew Henry. In simple terms, all the properties listed under entailed inheritance cannot remain vacant and must be passed down to male members of the family for generations. In his will, Mr. Dashwood added a rule that the estate must be inherited by Henry's son and his son's son in the future. The situation becomes complicated. Henry's son John, from his previous marriage, is already an adult and financially secure. While Henry inherits the estate, his real concern is securing the future of his second wife and the 3 daughters he had with her. It's worth noting that during that era, women had no independent economic status, and their rights depended either on their affluent parental homes or marriage. At this point, familiar readers of Austen's style can anticipate the general course of events. Before Henry can benefit from the inheritance and leave sufficient savings for his wife and daughters, he passes away prematurely. On his deathbed, John promises to take care of his stepmother and stepsisters, but as soon as his father is gone, he changes his mind under the instigation of his wife Fanny. In Chapter 2, there is a dialogue between John and Fanny that is exceptionally well written. Austen's control over dialogue, her profound characterization of the characters, and her trademark use of irony are all exemplified in this conversation, making it a classic teaching material for dialogues. Let's take a look at this captivating dialogue. At the beginning of the conversation, John intends to provide his stepmother with £3,000 to settle down, but Fanny employs a mix of persuasion and coercion, gradually cornering him. First, she reduces the amount to £1,500 and then attempts to change it to an annual payment. Fanny steps back and advances 3 steps in her negotiation tactics. Regarding the annual payment proposal, she calmly remarks, "Certainly, it is better to pay £1,500 at once, but if Mrs. Dashwood should live 15 years, we shall be completely taken in." John argues that his stepmother won't live half that long, and Fanny coldly replies, "People always live forever when there is an annuity to be paid them." After several rounds of this back and forth, the final conclusion is that John owes no particular gratitude to his father, nor is he under any necessity of concealing any real obligations. They can comfortably avoid paying a penny. Consequently, the stepmother and her family are forced to move out of their old home and settle into a modest country villa. In the eyes of others, the most realistic way for the Dashwood ladies to maintain their quality of life is to manipulate the marriage affairs of their already adult daughters, Eleanor and Marianne. The social pressure imposed on the two sisters is very real. As the story unfolds, we quickly see that although the two sisters have contrasting personalities, they are both unwilling to easily succumb to this pressure. They both refuse to let marriage become a form of financial product. Under this pressure, the inner tension of the novel arises from the struggles and resistance of the weaker individuals within the confined space. Eleanor, the elder sister, finds herself in a mutual affection with Fanny's brother, Edward, but they encounter a hitch when a girl named Lucy emerges, claiming she has been privately engaged to Edward for some time. Meanwhile, Marianne falls head over heels for a man named Willoughby, who is charming and dashing. However, she gradually discovers his ambiguous attitude, and under her pressing, he heartlessly sends her a break-up letter and quickly marries another wealthy woman. As the conflicts of these two love triangles reach their peaks, both sisters seem to be thrown into the vortex of love, disappointment, and uncertain futures. Of course, under Austen's pen, there are always solutions to these problems. The way to resolve the conflicts is to put the characters to the test in the turning points of the events, and achieve character determines destiny through their choices. We follow Austen's narration to witness how Eleanor remains steady amid all changes, enduring until Edward realizes Lucy's opportunistic nature. Similarly, we see Marianne experience a thrilling and dramatic fever, during which she discovers that the reserved Colonel Brandon is more reliable and virtuous, someone she can entrust her life to. In Chapter 48, Eleanor finally experiences a long-awaited reunion with Edward. The awkwardness and silence between the two build up tension for the dramatic climax. At this point in the novel, a deliberate misunderstanding is orchestrated, as Eleanor mistakenly believes, based on hearsay, that Edward has married Lucy. In that moment, the usually composed and steady Eleanor displays emotional loss of control for the first and only time in the entire story. In shock, Edward informs her that Lucy has actually married his brother, Robert, and Eleanor's emotions are pulled back from the brink of collapse. Subsequently, a touching scene unfolds. Eleanor could sit it no longer. She almost ran out of the room, and as soon as the door was closed, burst into tears of joy, which at first she thought would never cease. Edward, who had till then looked anywhere, rather than at her, saw her hurry away, and perhaps saw or even heard her emotion, for immediately afterwards he fell into a reverie, which no remarks, no inquiries, no affectionate address of Mrs. Dashwood could penetrate, and at last, without saying a word, quitted the room, and walked out towards the village, leaving the others in the greatest astonishment and perplexity on a change in his situation, so wonderful and so sudden, a perplexity which they had no means of lessening but by their own conjectures. This is the pinnacle moment in Sense and Sensibility. Eleanor's outburst of tears contrasts starkly with her previous demeanor, and this usually composed character reveals her emotional side, projecting the reader's emotional connection with her to its zenith. In 1995, in the film adaptation of Sense and Sensibility directed by An Lee, actress Emma Thompson's exceptional performance accurately conveyed this pivotal scene from the original work, leaving a lasting impression. Thompson ultimately won an Academy Award for her portrayal of this character. Similar to Austen's other novels, Sense and Sensibility has a satisfying conclusion. Austen is always generous in allowing all characters to find their resolutions. Those solely interested in money find themselves confined by their own greed, while those seeking a way to sustain themselves based on personal dignity and emotional quality, like Eleanor and Marianne, eventually find their happiness. If you have read Pride and Prejudice, you will find great reading pleasure in Sense and Sensibility. It presents events with a skillful arrangement of time, place, and character relationships, showcasing the full dramatic potential of the limited narrative space. Compared to Pride and Prejudice, the plotline of Sense and Sensibility is simpler, and the comedic tone is slightly more subdued. Furthermore, the traces of epistolary form are more apparent in this work, with key plot developments often driven by letters, and dialogues occupying a larger proportion of the novel's text. In some lengthy dialogues, you can even imagine how they were originally written in letters. Hence, at first glance, Sense and Sensibility may not appear as lively or enthralling as Pride and Prejudice. However, Sense and Sensibility is not a condensed version of Pride and Prejudice. Its charm requires more time to savor. Austen dedicated considerable effort to crafting the characters in this work. Marianne, the younger sister, ardently pursues romantic and refined emotions, and her daily behavior and values are deeply influenced by the literature and arts of the Romantic era. Marianne has no interest in men who are not handsome or cannot elegantly recite lines from Cooper's poems and dislike painting. In social settings, she possesses innate beauty, sensitivity, and passion, openly displaying her admiration for Willoughby. This open and honest nature is both endearing and her vulnerability. However, Marianne's emotions never reach a point of complete loss of control. At each critical moment, she returns to her normal self under Eleanor's persuasion. In various details of the novel, we can see that Marianne has a basic understanding of the practical basis of marriage. She believes that marriage cannot be merely a business contract, with both parties seeking personal gain, and that wealth, besides providing ample living conditions, cannot bring true happiness to humanity. However, she still expresses that her basic requirement is an income of £1,800 to £2,000 per year, a standard much higher than Eleanor's recognized basic need. These non-emotional aspects add greatly to the richness of Marianne's character. Now, let's consider Eleanor. Her superficial character traits are calm, patient, and emotionally composed. Yet, upon closer analysis of her words and actions, we find that Eleanor's sense is not merely about concealing her emotions, nor is it about weakness or incompetence. In many details, we can discern that her composure is accompanied by astute understanding of the world and human relationships, and her self-restraint often has a strategic orientation. For example, in dealing with her relationship with Lucy, Eleanor's judgment is especially outstanding. She quickly and accurately discerns Lucy's true nature, driven by self-interest, and firmly maintains her trust in Edward's character. Based on this foundation, Eleanor's subsequent attitude of observation and her discreet assistance to Edward in finding a position appear both appropriate and wise. Throughout the novel, scenes of deep conversations between the sisters occur frequently. Through their dialogues, Austen not only integrates sense and sensibility into the plot, but also offers additional thoughts beyond the storyline. In her view, women in a disadvantaged position can only achieve a complete personality through continuous self-improvement. Perhaps, combining Eleanor and Marianne would create the ideal woman in Austen's mind. It is worth noting that intertwining the growth histories of the two female characters to narrate the story also constitutes a classic type of women's literature. In the novel, they are sometimes sisters and sometimes close friends. In this sense, Austen's Sense and Sensibility is undoubtedly groundbreaking. In these stories, the characters and experiences of the two women often form a distinct contrast, and only when they are combined can they create a complete ideal female personality. Strengthening a certain trait often leads to the loss of another, and this constant sense of lack is also part of the dilemma faced by women. The process of female growth in such stories is often a mixture of joy and sorrow, full of hardships, passion, and paradoxes, making it particularly impactful. In recent literary works, the Booker Prize-winning novel The Blind Assassin by Canadian novelist Margaret Atwood and the phenomenally best-selling Italian novel The Neapolitan Novels can also be seen as extensions and variations of this story type. In addition, the value of sense and sensibility is also reflected in its active contribution to the evolution of novel techniques. As we know, in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the novel was still relatively lowly positioned in the literary ecosystem. Novel techniques were mostly the result of self-cultivation by writers, without literary theories or creative writing classes. Therefore, Austen's self-awareness and innate sense of proportion in novelistic innovations are truly admirable. Some literary researchers believe that Austen was among the first novelists to use the technique of free indirect speech in the text. This is a narrative style where the narrator not only tells about people and events from an objective perspective but also expresses their own subjective attitude. For example, in this passage from Chapter 4 of Sense and Sensibility, Eleanor had given her real opinion to her sister. She could not consider her partiality for Edward in so prosperous a state as Marianne had believed it. There was, at times, a want of spirits about him which, if it did not denote indifference, spoke of something almost as unpromising. A doubt of her regard, supposing him to feel it, need not give him more than inquietude. It would not be likely to produce that dejection of mind which frequently attended him. A more reasonable cause might be found in the dependent situation which forbade the indulgence of his affection. This passage seems to be Eleanor talking about Edward on the surface, but it clearly reflects Eleanor's psychological activity and subjective analysis, more like Eleanor's first-person narrative rather than a God's-eye view, and it does not represent Austen's position. This passage uses free indirect speech, seamlessly integrating with the surrounding text, allowing the narration to shuttle freely between subjective and objective perspectives, much like a camera changing angles frequently. This expressive effect is naturally much better than the rigid question and answer style. In Sense and Sensibility, free indirect speech is often interspersed throughout the extensive dialogues. Sense and Sensibility, although narrated in the third person, mainly unfolds from Eleanor's personal perspective. Readers often follow Eleanor's eyes to see through the complexities of the world and experience how she deals with challenging situations. The social circles of respectable families are full of deception and intrigue, and young men and women often have to navigate their feelings for each other and speculate on their marriage prospects through analyzing various rumors. Eleanor's perspective is sometimes disturbed by elusive gossip, leading to some illusions. Thus, we may find ourselves at times anxiously following Eleanor, and at other times solving puzzles and deciphering riddles alongside her. Through this approach, the once mundane and ordinary daily life becomes thrilling and memorable in Austen's pen, showcasing the most enchanting moments of this literary genre. Austen passed away at the young age of 42, and she created 6 full-length novels, all centered around everyday life. Her works differ significantly from our contemporary understanding of romance novels. They lack the passionate declarations of love and life-and-death commitments, but are filled with social gatherings, card games, social calls, and endless chit-chats. Austen's brilliance lies in her ability to carve intricately on ivory. When you look through a magnifying glass, every detail is minutely portrayed, and you can even see the sharpness of the stroke of her pen. She has her own effective ways of creating suspense in the mundane flow of life and guiding readers to experience heart-pounding moments amidst the domestic details. In conclusion, we have now thoroughly explored the essence of Sense and Sensibility. Let's recap the key points covered in today's content. 1. Sense and Sensibility is Austen's first published full-length novel. It and Pride and Prejudice were both conceived and written during the same period. The two works share many similarities in plot, writing style, and character development. 2. In Sense and Sensibility, Austen devoted much effort to shaping Eleanor and Marianne. Intertwining the growth histories of the two female characters to narrate the story also constitutes a classic type of women's literature. 3. In Austen's writing, the solution to problems lies in placing the characters at critical turning points and testing them through their choices, ultimately leading to the belief that character determines destiny. 4. Austen demonstrates conscious innovation and an innate sense of proportion in novelistic techniques. She chooses to focus on everyday life, skillfully carving intricately on ivory, understanding how to create suspense in the flow of mundane life, and guiding readers to experience thrilling moments amidst the domestic setting. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.